When my billionaire grandmother looked around the walnut table and announced that only one of us knew the truth, every eye turned to me. I sat frozen because I was the one who brought them to this trial. None of them understood that billions of dollars were about to vanish because of what they did behind her back. Tonight, they would hear their own voices in the recordings I collected over the last 12 months, shattering our family forever. My name is Savannah Brooks, and as I sat at the far end of the polished walnut table, I realized that I was the only person in the room breathing normally. The air in the dining hall of the Sinclair estate was always cold, kept at a preservationist temperature to protect the oil paintings of our ancestors and the sanity of the woman who owned them. But tonight the chill felt different. It was the kind of cold that settles into your bones right before a storm breaks the levee. I smoothed the napkin over my lap, feeling the heavy, expensive linen against my fingertips. I was 34 years old, a risk analyst by trade, and a ghost by practice. For the last decade, I had perfected the art of blending into the beige wallpaper of this mansion, becoming exactly what my family needed me to be, which was usually invisible until they required someone to fix a spreadsheet or sign a document they did not understand. But invisibility was a double-edged sword. It meant they never saw me coming. The dining room was a cavern of old money. The chandeliers above us were crystal and dust, casting a dim golden light that made the shadows in the corners seem to stretch toward the table. We were seated for what was ostensibly a celebration of the fiscal year end for Sinclair Harbor Holdings, the shipping and logistics empire my grandmother had built from the ground up when women were barely allowed to open checking accounts without a husband. But there was no celebration in the air. There was only a suffocating silence, broken only by the occasional clink of sterling silver against fine china. I watched my mother from across the table. She was wearing a silk dress that I knew cost $4,000 because I had seen the credit card statement 3 weeks ago. Her hand kept fluttering up to her neck, fingers tracing the cold chain of her diamond necklace as if she were checking for a pulse. She looked terrified. Next to her, my father was gripping the stem of his wine glass with such white-knuckled intensity that I worried the crystal would snap and send a spray of Cabernet across the white tablecloth. He was staring at the centerpiece, a massive arrangement of white lilies that smelled too much like a funeral parlor, refusing to make eye contact with anyone, especially his mother at the head of the table. Then there was my cousin, Mason. He sat 2 seats down from me, slouching in a way that was meant to look relaxed but only screamed arrogance. He was 36, 2 years my senior, and had the kind of handsome, rugged face that allowed him to fail upward for his entire adult life. He was scrolling through his phone under the table, the blue light illuminating his jawline. I could see the sheen of sweat on his upper lip. He knew something was wrong. They all did. They just did not know the scale of it yet. And at the head of the table sat Eleanor Sinclair. My grandmother was 78 years old, but she possessed the vitality of a woman half her age and the ruthlessness of a general. She sat with her back perfectly straight, her silver hair coiffed into an immaculate bob that did not permit a single strand to fly out of place. She was cutting her steak with precise, surgical movements. She had not spoken a word since we sat down 20 minutes ago. This was her power move. She let the silence do the work for her. She let them marinate in their own guilt until the tension was so thick it became a physical weight on their chests. I took a sip of water, my throat dry. Underneath my chair, tucked securely inside my leather tote bag, was an external hard drive. It was small, black, and unassuming, no larger than a deck of cards. But inside that plastic casing was a digital bomb that I had spent the last 365 days assembling. It contained every wire transfer, every altered ledger, every hushed voicemail, and every deleted email that my family had generated in their systematic looting of the Sinclair fortune. I felt a strange dissociation, like I was watching a movie of my own life. I remembered the conversation I overheard last week between Mason and Aunt Loretta. They were standing by the pool house, thinking I had already left for the city. Mason had been complaining about the rumors that Grandma was meeting with her estate planners. He had called her senile. He had said they needed to accelerate the transfers before the old witch kicked the bucket. Aunt Loretta had laughed a nervous, high-pitched sound and told him that everything was just procedure. She told him not to worry, because they had Savannah to handle the paperwork if anything got complicated. That was their mistake. They always assumed Savannah would handle the paperwork. They just never stopped to think about what Savannah would do if she actually read it. Eleanor stopped eating. She placed her knife and fork down on her plate with a deliberate clatter that echoed off the high ceilings like a gunshot. The reaction was instant. My mother jumped in her seat. My father finally looked up from the lilies. Mason slid his phone into his pocket, straightening his blazer as if he were about to be inspected by a drill sergeant. Eleanor did not speak immediately. She picked up her heavy crystal goblet, took a slow sip of water, and then set it back down. She picked up a silver spoon and tapped it gently against the rim of the glass. Ding, ding, ding. The sound was delicate, but it commanded absolute submission. She rested her hands on the table, fingers interlaced. Her eyes, sharp and gray as the Atlantic Ocean in winter, swept around the table. She looked at her daughter, Loretta. She looked at her son, my father. She looked at her golden grandson, Mason. And for a brief, terrifying second, her gaze flickered over me. "I have been thinking a lot about loyalty lately," Eleanor said. Her voice was low, raspy but steady. The voice of a woman who had negotiated with union bosses and hostile takeover artists before I was born. "It is a currency, more valuable than the stocks in your portfolios, more liquid than the cash in your accounts, and significantly harder to earn back once it has been spent." My father cleared his throat. "Mother, is this about the quarterly reports? Because I can assure you—" "Quiet," Eleanor said. She did not shout. She did not have to. The word was a command. My father shut his mouth instantly, his face flushing a deep, embarrassed red. Eleanor leaned forward. The candlelight caught the reflection in her eyes. "I invited you all here tonight not to discuss the quarterly reports. I invited you here because I have received an education. Over the past year, I have learned a great deal about the people sitting at this table. I have learned about shell companies. I have learned about offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands that bear my last name but not my signature. I have learned about loans taken out against properties I own, authorized by people who are not me." The air in the room vanished. It was as if a vacuum had been turned on, sucking the oxygen right out of our lungs. I saw Mason's hand tremble as he reached for his wine glass. He knocked it slightly, sending a ripple of red liquid up the side, but he managed to steady it before it spilled. "Whatever you think you know," Aunt Loretta began, her voice shaking, "there must be a misunderstanding. We have only ever acted in the best interest of the family." "The family," Eleanor repeated, tasting the word like it was spoiled milk. "Yes, that is what you tell yourselves, that it stays in the family." She paused, her gaze intensifying. "But here's the thing about secrets in this house. The walls are thick, but they are not soundproof, and paper trails, no matter how shredded, have a way of piecing themselves back together if you have the right person looking for the glue." My heart began to hammer against my ribs. It was a rhythmic thudding in my ears, louder than the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. I knew what was coming. I had been the one who briefed her. I had been the one who sat in her study 3 days ago, laying out the spreadsheets that proved my father had embezzled nearly $250,000 in renovations for a summer home we did not own. I was the one who played her the audio file of Mason bragging about his new sports car bought with company dividends that were supposed to go to charity. Eleanor looked around the table one last time. Her expression was unreadable, a mask of iron control. "Only one of you knows the truth," she said. The sentence hung in the air, suspended and heavy. "Only one of you knows exactly why we are gathered here tonight. Only one of you knows the full extent of what I have discovered, and only one of you has been honest with me." Every head turned. They looked at each other first, suspicion darting between husband and wife, between brother and sister. Then, slowly, inevitably, their eyes turned to me. I was the quiet one, the observer. the one who sat at the end of the table and did not ask for seconds. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, but I kept my face neutral. I had practiced this face in the mirror for weeks. It was the face of the risk analyst delivering a catastrophic forecast. "And tonight," Eleanor continued, "we are all going to hear it." She gestured to the corner of the room. For the first time, the family seemed to notice the man sitting in the shadows by the sideboard. It was Mr. Calder, Eleanor's personal attorney for 40 years. He was a man of few words and even fewer smiles. He was sitting in a high-backed chair, a thick manila folder open on his lap. On the small side table next to his water glass sat a digital voice recorder. The red light was already blinking. Recording. Mason looked like he was going to be sick. "Grandma, this is insane. You are bringing Calder into a family dinner. Whatever rumors you have heard, we can explain them. You do not need to make a scene." "A scene," Eleanor laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Mason, you bought a condominium in Miami with funds allocated for the dock workers' pension fund. That is not a scene. That is a felony." Mason's jaw dropped. I borrowed it. It was an investment. I was going to pay it back with the equity." "We will get to the specifics later." Eleanor cut him off. She reached under the table and pulled out a thick, padded envelope. She placed it in the center of the table, right next to the funeral lilies. The thud it made was heavy, substantial. "In this envelope," she said, pointing a manicured finger at the package, "is the future. It contains the revised drafts of my estate plan. It contains the forensic accounting reports commissioned by an independent firm, and it contains transcripts of conversations you all thought were private." I shifted in my seat. I could feel the hard drive in my bag calling to me. The transcripts she was talking about were my transcripts. The recordings were my recordings. I was the architect of this destruction. "Tonight determines who walks out of this house with a legacy," Eleanor said, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than a scream. "And who walks out with nothing but the clothes on their back and a court summons." My mother started to cry. It was a soft, pitiful sobbing. "Eleanor, please, we are family. We are your children." "That," Eleanor said, "is the only reason the police are not waiting in the kitchen, yet." She looked at me then, a direct, piercing look that stripped away the pretense. She knew I was scared. She knew I hated conflict. She knew that for 34 years, I had been the peacekeeper, the doormat, the one who smoothed over the cracks to keep the portrait looking pretty, but she also knew that I was the only one who had refused to steal from her. "Savannah," my father hissed, leaning toward me. "Do you know about this? Did you help her with this?" I looked at my father. I saw the fear in his eyes, but underneath the fear, I saw the anger, the entitlement. He wasn't sorry he stole. He was sorry he got caught. He looked at me not as his daughter, but as a leak in the hull that he should have plugged years ago. I gripped the edge of the table. "I think we should listen to Grandma," I said. My voice was steady, surprising even me. Eleanor nodded, satisfied. She sat back in her chair, looking like a queen presiding over an execution. "Before anyone speaks," Eleanor commanded, raising her hand to silence the rising murmur of protests from Aunt Loretta and Mason. "Before anyone offers an excuse, or a lie, or a justification. We are going to listen. We are going to listen to everything, every recording, every transaction. You are going to sit there, and you are going to listen to the sound of your own greed." She motioned to Mr. Calder. The lawyer stood up slowly, picking up the digital recorder. He walked toward the table, his footsteps heavy on the Persian rug. He placed the device in the center of the table, right on top of the thick envelope. "Press play, Mr. Calder," Eleanor said. The room went deathly silent. The only sound was the wind howling outside the bay windows, rattling the glass in their frames. I looked at the recorder. I knew exactly whose voice was going to come out of it first. I knew exactly what they were going to say. And I knew that once that button was pressed, the Brooks family as we knew it would cease to exist. I watched Mason's face turn the color of ash. I saw my mother reach for my father's hand, only for him to pull it away. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of lilies and impending doom. I had brought the matches, and my grandmother had just poured the gasoline. Now, all we had to do was watch it burn. "Nobody leaves this table," Eleanor said, her eyes locking on mine with a fierce pride that terrified me more than her anger. "Nobody leaves until the truth is finished." To understand why I did not flinch when Mr. Calder placed that recorder on the table, you have to understand the house I grew up in. It was a perfectly average colonial in a perfectly average suburb, the kind with manicured lawns and two-car garages that hid a multitude of sins. We were not poor, not by any stretch of the imagination, but we lived in a constant state of performed scarcity. My parents, Robert and Linda, treated money like an unpredictable weather system. Sometimes it rained on us, but mostly, it was a drought that only seemed to affect one side of the hallway. For most of my childhood, I believed the lie. I believed that the Sinclair fortune was a distant, untouchable thing, a heavy crown that my grandmother wore which offered us no warmth. My father would sit at the kitchen table, surrounded by bills, rubbing his temples and talking about the burden of legacy, about how Grandma Eleanor held the purse strings tight, because she wanted us to build character. He told me that every dollar we received was a test, and that we had to be grateful for the scraps. But even as a child, I noticed that the testing conditions were different for my cousin Mason. The first time the glass cracked was the summer I turned 14. I had spent months building a portfolio to apply for a prestigious summer intensive program at a university 3 states away. It was a program focused on data visualization and graphic design, a perfect blend of the artistic and the analytical sides of my brain. I had worked harder on that application than I had ever worked on anything. When the acceptance letter came, I remember running into the kitchen, the thick envelope clutching in my shaking hands, feeling like I had finally punched my ticket to something that was mine. My mother was chopping vegetables at the island. She wiped her hands on a towel and read the letter. I watched her face for pride, but all I saw was a calculation. She sighed, the sound long and weary. She told me that it was wonderful news, really wonderful, but the tuition for the program was simply too high. She told me that Grandma Eleanor was in a tightening phase with the family trust, and that we just did not have the liquidity for something that was, in her words, extracurricular. Then came the line that would become the soundtrack of my adolescence. She looked at me with those soft, pleading eyes and said that I would understand. She said I always understood. She said I was the reasonable one, the one who knew that sacrifices had to be made for the greater good of the family. I swallowed my disappointment. I told myself that being the reasonable one was a badge of honor. It meant I was mature. It meant I was part of the team. I wrote a letter declining the acceptance, feeling a physical ache in my chest as I dropped it in the mailbox. 3 weeks later, I was scrolling through social media on my phone when I saw the photos. Mason, who was 16 at the time and had just barely scraped by with passing grades in his sophomore year, was tagged in a photo at a luxury ski resort in Aspen. He was wearing a brand new parka, holding expensive gear, standing in front of a chalet that cost more per night than my entire summer program would have cost for 6 weeks. The caption read, "Living the high life." Thanks, Grandma. I sat on my bed, staring at the screen until my eyes burned. I walked downstairs and showed the phone to my mother. I asked her how we could afford a $5,000 ski trip for Mason when we could not afford $2,000 for my education. My mother did not even blink. She told me that it was different. She said that Mason had been struggling with his self-esteem and that Grandma Eleanor had authorized the trip as a reward for his effort in finishing the school year. She said it was an investment in his mental health. She said that because I was so naturally strong, so self-sufficient. I did not need that kind of coddling. That was the moment I realized that in the Brooks family economy, my competence was a penalty tax, because I did not cause problems. I did not get resources. Mason was a squeaky wheel, so he got the oil. I was a smooth-running engine, so I was ignored. From that day on, the pattern became impossible to unsee. When I asked for art supplies, they were deemed too expensive. When Mason wanted a new gaming laptop because his old one was lagging, it was categorized as essential technology for his future networking skills. When I needed braces, there was a 6-month discussion about timing and insurance. When Mason crashed his first car, a replacement appeared in the driveway 2 days later, paid for by a special disbursement from the estate. And then there was Grandma Eleanor herself. To me, she was less of a grandmother and more of a mythological figure. She was rarely at the suburban house. She lived in the mansion by the bay, spending her days in boardrooms and her nights at gala dinners. But when she did visit, or when we went to her, she was terrifyingly observant. She did not bring me dolls or clothes. She brought me books, hardcover biographies of industry titans, books on economic theory, thick volumes on history. I remember one Christmas when I was 12. Mason received a dirt bike. I received a first edition copy of a book on forensic accounting. My parents laughed nervously, apologizing to me, saying Grandma was eccentric, but I loved that book. I read it cover to cover, I think, in her own cold way. She was trying to teach me the language she spoke, the only language that mattered in her world. But my parents were the translators, and they were terrible at it. The suspicion that this was not just favoritism, but something darker took root when I was 17. It was a Tuesday night, and I was sitting at the top of the stairs, doing homework. The house was quiet, so the voices from the kitchen carried up the stairwell with perfect clarity. My father was shouting. It was a hushed, strangled kind of shouting, the way people yell when they know they shouldn't be heard. He was angry about my college tuition. I had been accepted to a state university. I had chosen it specifically because it was affordable, trying to be the good daughter again. But my father wasn't angry about the cost. He was angry about the payment method. I heard him say to my mother that he could not believe Eleanor had sent the check directly to the bursar's office. He was pacing. I could hear his heavy footsteps on the linoleum. He said it was insulting. He said that as my father, he should be the one managing the funds for my education. He said he had counted on that transfer to cover the float for the month. That word stuck in my brain. Float. Why would he need my tuition money to cover a float if Grandma was paying for college? The money should go to the college. Why did he want it to pass through his hands first? I crept back to my room, my heart pounding. That was the night the innocence finally died. I realized that my parents were not just favoring Mason. They were using us as conduits. Mason was a willing conduit, asking for things he didn't need so they could inflate the request and skim off the top. I was a blocked pipe. I asked for too little, and when I did get something, like tuition, Grandma paid it directly, cutting them out of the loop. My frugality wasn't just saving them money, it was costing them opportunity. Despite this, we kept up the charade, every Thanksgiving and Christmas. We would drive to the mansion by the bay. We would put on our best clothes and perform the play titled The Perfect Family. The dining room table was the stage. Mason would sit there, looking charming and slightly disheveled, and spin tales about his latest business ventures. He had a new startup idea every 6 months, a social media app for pets, a luxury concierge service, a bespoke sneaker brand. None of them ever launched, but he would talk about seed rounds and market penetration using buzzwords he had clearly memorized from a podcast that morning. My parents would beam at him. They would tell Grandma Eleanor that Mason was showing so much initiative, that he just needed a little more runway to really take off. Then they would turn to me, and the light in their eyes would dim. They would pat my hand and tell Grandma that Savannah was doing fine. Just fine. She was so steady. She was working hard at her little job. She never asks for anything. They would say, "She is such a low-maintenance child. We are so lucky we don't have to worry about her." They said it like it was a compliment, but I heard what it really was. It was a dismissal. It was a way of telling Grandma, "Don't look over here, nothing to see. Keep your eyes and your checkbook focused on the boy." Grandma would listen, her face impassive, cutting her turkey with surgical precision. She never asked for details. That was the part that frustrated me the most back then. She was a billionaire CEO. How could she not see through Mason's cheap suit and hollow words? How could she not see that my parents were sweating through their formal wear? I grew resentful of her. 2. I thought she didn't care. I thought she accepted their version of reality because it was easier than digging for the truth. As I entered my 20s and started my career, the dynamic solidified. I stopped asking for anything. I paid for my own apartment. I paid for my own car. I paid off the small student loans I had to take out for living expenses because my parents claimed the education fund was depleted. But I started keeping a record. It started as a way to vent. I bought a simple black notebook and kept it in my bedside drawer. At first, the entries were emotional. Mom promised to help with the security deposit, then said the liquidity wasn't there. Saw Dad driving a new Lexus 2 days later. But as my professional skills as a risk analyst grew, the notebook changed. The emotional entries were replaced by data points. I stopped writing about how I felt and started writing about what I saw. July 4th. Mason claims he needs $12,000 for a legal retainer for a business dispute. Grandma writes a check to Dad. Mason has no pending lawsuits in the public court records. Dad buys a new boat engine on July 10th. September 12th. Aunt Loretta claims cousin Sophie needs orthodontic surgery. Estimate submitted $8,000. Actual cost of procedure according to regional averages $4,000. Where did the other $4,000 go? I began to track the flow of money like I tracked market trends at work. I realized that the family was essentially a shell company designed to siphon wealth from Eleanor Sinclair, and the primary employees of this shell company were my parents, my aunt, and Mason. I was the unpaid intern they kept in the basement because I refused to get my hands dirty. I told myself for a long time that this wasn't a crime. It was just family. It was ugly, and it was unfair. But it wasn't illegal. Grandma gave them money because she loved them, and they misused it. That was a moral failing, not a legal one. That was the lie I used to sleep at night. I told myself that as long as they weren't stealing, as long as they were just manipulating a generous old woman, it wasn't my place to blow it up. I was the good daughter, the one who understood, the one who didn't cause drama. But deep down, I knew. You don't hide legitimate gifts. You don't scream in hushed tones about tuition checks being sent directly to schools unless you have something to hide. I remember one specific afternoon, about 3 years ago. I was visiting my parents' house for a barbecue. I went into my old room, which had been turned into a guest office for my father. On the desk, amidst a pile of papers, was a bank statement. I shouldn't have looked, but I did. It was a statement for a joint account I didn't know existed. It was in my father's name and Mason's name. The balance was staggering, almost $200,000. I stared at the number, feeling the air leave the room. $200,000. That was more than I made in 3 years. And here it was, sitting in a checking account, liquid and ready. My father walked in. He saw me looking. For a split second, I saw panic in his eyes. Real, primal panic. Then he smoothed it over with a laugh that sounded like grinding gears. He grabbed the paper from my hand, crumbling it slightly. He told me it was just some estate planning funds he was managing for Grandma. He told me it was boring tax stuff. Then he put his hand on my shoulder, gripping it a little too tight. "You worry too much, Savannah," he said. "You always have. You overthink things. Just go outside and get a burger. Let the men handle the finances." I walked out of that room, and for the first time, I didn't feel hurt. I didn't feel the sting of being dismissed. I felt cold. I realized then that my responsibility and my independence were the greatest gifts I could have given myself. They thought they had sidelined me. They thought they had cut me out of the loop to protect their profits. But what they had actually done was give me the perfect vantage point. I was outside the system. I wasn't dependent on their handouts. I didn't need their approval to pay my rent, and because I didn't need them, I could watch them. If I hadn't spent my childhood being told no, I might have been addicted to the yes like Mason. I might have been sitting at that table tonight, sweating and terrified, hoping the gravy train wouldn't derail. Instead, I was the one inspecting the tracks. The little cuts of my childhood, the missed summer camp, the denied art supplies, The "you'll understand" speeches had scar tissue over them now. And that scar tissue was armor. It made me numb to their tears. It made me immune to their guilt trips. When I looked at my mother across the dinner table tonight, crying into her napkin, I didn't see the woman who raised me. I saw the woman who chose a ski trip for her nephew over her daughter's education because it was easier to manipulate the funds. I sat there, feeling the weight of the hard drive in my bag against my ankle. I thought about the 14-year-old girl who just wanted to learn how to design graphs. I thought about how she was told there wasn't enough money. Tonight, I was going to show them exactly where the money went, and I wasn't going to be the understanding daughter anymore. I was going to be the data analyst, and the data did not lie. It was strange, really. They spent my whole life telling me I was the one who could take care of myself. They were right. I could. And tonight, taking care of myself meant taking them down. 6 months before the dinner that would end the world as we knew it, I was sitting in my office at Halcyon Metrics Group, staring at a forensic audit for a mid-sized pharmaceutical company. My job title was Senior Risk Analyst, but what I really did was look for ghosts in the machine. I looked for the tiny, inconsequential numbers that did not add up, the rounding errors that drifted into offshore accounts, and the duplicate invoices that signaled someone in middle management was renovating their kitchen on the company dime. I was good at it. I was good at it because I had spent my entire life watching people pretend to be something they were not. My life outside the Sinclair estate was unrecognizable to my family. I lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in the Harbor District, a place with exposed brick walls and a view of the industrial docks. I loved it because I paid for every square inch of it. My rent was paid with checks signed by me, drawn from funds earned by me, covering hours I had worked myself. There was no Sinclair Trust Fund subsidies, no allowance from Grandma, no bridge loans from my father. Yet, whenever my parents bragged about me at country club dinners, the narrative was always the same. They would tell their friends that Savannah was thriving because she had such a solid foundation. They would say that their support gave me the wings to fly. They never mentioned that my student loans were still being paid off in monthly installments of $400, or that the solid foundation they provided was actually quicksand I had clawed my way out of. Mason, on the other hand, was living the life they pretended I had. In the last 3 years, Mason had launched and crashed 2 startups. One was a luxury water brand that failed because he forgot to secure distribution rights, and the other was a lifestyle app for high-net-worth networking that never made it out of beta testing. Despite these failures, his Instagram feed was a curated gallery of success. He posted photos of himself in first-class cabins and at exclusive resorts, captioning them with quotes about grinding and hustling. I knew the truth behind the hustle because I was the one cleaning up the spreadsheets. It had become a ritual. Every few months, Mason would call me in a panic. He would say he needed help organizing his financials for a meeting with potential investors. I would go over to his loft, which was paid for by a housing stipend from the family trust, and look at his laptop. The numbers were always a disaster. Personal expenses were mixed with business capital. There were charges for bottle service at nightclubs listed as client acquisition. I would sit there, sighing, and move the columns around. I would create profit and loss statements that made sense out of chaos. I did it because I was conditioned to help. I did it because if I didn't, my father would call me and ask why I wasn't supporting my cousin's dreams. I was the mechanic keeping the clown car running, but the favors were getting bigger, and they were getting stranger. One afternoon, my Aunt Loretta called me. She was sweet, her voice dripping with that sugary affection she only used when she wanted something. She told me she was setting up a savings vehicle for the younger cousins, the ones who were just starting high school. She said she needed a reliable adult to be a co-signatory on the account for regulatory reasons, just to get it opened. She asked if I would mind lending my name to the paperwork. She said it was purely administrative. She said, "Savannah, you are the only one with a clean enough credit score and no business entanglements. It is just for the kids." I hesitated. My risk analyst brain triggered a low-level warning. But this was Aunt Loretta. This was family, and I was the responsible one. I signed the digital documents she sent over without reading the fine print as thoroughly as I would have for a client. I assumed it was a dormant account, a place to park birthday money. I mentioned this to Ava and Jonas a few nights later. We were sitting on my balcony, drinking cheap wine and eating takeout. Ava was a colleague at Halcyon, sharp as a tack, and Jonas was a neighbor who worked in maritime law. When I told them about Mason's spreadsheets and Aunt Loretta's bank account, the air on the balcony changed. Ava put down her wine glass. "Savannah," she said, looking at me with genuine concern. "That is not normal. You know that, right? They are treating your grandmother's money like it is a community chest in a Monopoly game, and they are using your name as a shield." "It is just family stuff," I said, repeating the line I had been programmed to say. "They are messy, but they aren't malicious." Jonas shook his head. "Rich people don't stay rich by being messy, Savannah. They stay rich by making sure someone else takes the fall when the mess gets too big. You need to be careful." I brushed them off, but their words stuck with me like a splinter. Then came the scare. It was a Tuesday in November when Grandma Eleanor collapsed during a board meeting. It turned out to be a transient ischemic attack, a mini-stroke brought on by stress and high blood pressure. It was not life-threatening, but it was a wake-up call. She was 78. She was mortal. I rushed to the private hospital where she had been admitted. I expected to find a somber vigil. I expected to see my father holding her hand, or my mother comforting Aunt Loretta. Instead, I walked into a scene that felt more like a merger negotiation than a family crisis. Grandma was sleeping in the VIP suite, hooked up to monitors that beeped in a steady, reassuring rhythm. But out in the hallway, the energy was frenetic. My father was pacing back and forth, talking rapidly into his phone. Mason was leaning against the wall, texting furiously. Aunt Loretta was flipping through a stack of documents on a clipboard. When I approached them, nobody asked how I was. Nobody hugged me. "Did you see the doctor?" my mother asked, her eyes wide but dry. "Did he say anything about her cognitive faculties? Is she lucid?" "She is sleeping, Mom," I said, feeling a cold knot form in my stomach. "She just had a stroke. Why are you asking about her cognitive faculties?" My father hung up his phone and turned to me. "We need to be practical. Savannah, if she is incapacitated, we need to know who has power of attorney. The markets get jittery when a CEO goes down. We are just trying to protect the company." Protect the company. That was their code word for protecting their allowance. I spent the next 3 days at the hospital. I sat by Grandma's bedside, reading to her when she was awake, holding her hand when she slept. My parents, Aunt Loretta, and Mason were rarely in the room. They spent their time in the cafeteria or the waiting lounge, huddled in low-voiced conferences. I saw them disappearing. My father and Mason would vanish for hours at a time. When I asked where they went, they would give me vague answers. They said they were handling logistics. They said they were speaking with Grandma's legal team to ensure continuity. "Don't worry your head about it, Savannah," Mason told me, clapping a hand on my shoulder that felt heavy and fake. "Everything is under control. We have it handled." It was the "we" that bothered me. Since when was Mason part of the "we" that handled legal matters? He couldn't even handle his own tax return. The tipping point came 2 weeks after Grandma was discharged. I was at home, working late on a case involving a construction firm that was padding its invoices. It was nearly midnight. My eyes were tired, the blue light of the monitor blurring my vision. I decided to check my personal email one last time before bed. I scrolled through the junk mail newsletters, coupons, spam, and then I saw it. It was an automated notification from a bank. The subject line read, "Statement ready. Sinclair Legacy. Sub-account ending in 409. I froze. I did not bank with that institution. I had my checking account at a local credit union. I stared at the subject line, my finger hovering over the mouse. Sinclair Legacy, sub-account. The name implied it was connected to the family trust. But why was it coming to my personal email? And why was it addressed to me as the beneficiary? A chill went down my spine. The same feeling I got when I found a discrepancy in a client's ledger that turned $1 million profit into a $10 million loss. I clicked the email. It was a standard notification, asking me to log in to view my statement. I didn't have a login. I clicked the Forgot Password link. I entered my social security number. My heart hammering against my ribs. The system recognized me. It sent a reset code to my phone. My hands were shaking as I typed in the code. I created a new password. The screen refreshed. And suddenly, I was looking at a dashboard I had never seen before. Welcome, Savannah Brooks. Account balance, $352,042. I gasped aloud in the empty apartment. $350,000. I clicked on the transaction history. My eyes scanned the lines, my brain processing the data faster than my emotions could catch up. November 12th. Outgoing wire transfer, $50,000. Recipient Mason Brooks Ventures, LLC. Authorized by S. Brooks Digital Signature, November 18th. Outgoing wire transfer, $25,000. Recipient Harbor Contractors. Memo Home Renovation. Authorized by S. Brooks Digital Signature, December 2nd. Cash withdrawal, $9,000. Authorized by S. Brooks. I sat back in my chair, the blood draining from my face. The dates lined up perfectly with Grandma's hospitalization. While I was sitting by her bed holding her hand, someone had been logging into this account, an account I didn't know existed, and draining it dry using a digital copy of my signature. I looked at the authorization logs. The IP addresses were not mine. One was from the hospital's public Wi-Fi. Another was from my parents' house. I thought about the favors. I thought about Aunt Loretta asking me to sign for the cousin's savings account. That wasn't a savings account for kids. That was the capture of my signature. They had used that signature to open this sub-account, funnel money from the main trust into it, and then spend it as if I were the one handing out the cash. I was not just the invisible child anymore. I was the fall guy. If the IRS looked at this, they wouldn't see my father or Mason. They would see Savannah Brooks moving hundreds of thousands of dollars around. They would see me funding Mason's failed business. They would see me paying for my parents' renovations. I felt a wave of nausea hit me. This wasn't just unfairness. This wasn't just Mason getting a ski trip while I stayed home. This was identity theft. This was fraud. This was my family framing me for their embezzlement. I closed the laptop. But the image of the numbers was burned into my retinas. $350,000. I walked to the window and looked out at the dark harbor. The city lights were reflecting on the black water, distorted and wavering. I thought about calling my parents. I thought about screaming at them, demanding an explanation. But then the training kicked in. The Halcyon Metrics Group training. You never tip off the subject of an investigation until you have the full picture. You never ask a question you don't already know the answer to. I turned away from the window. I didn't go to sleep. I went back to my desk, opened a fresh spreadsheet, and typed a new header. Subject, Sinclair Family Audit. I wasn't going to ask them why. I was going to find out exactly how much they had taken, and I was going to make sure that when the bill came due, I wasn't the one left holding the check. Something was fundamentally broken in the architecture of my family. And for the first time in my life, I was going to stop trying to fix it. I was going to document the collapse. The following morning, I walked into the downtown branch of First Merchant Bank. I did not make an appointment through the family concierge service, which would have alerted my father immediately. Instead, I walked in off the street like a regular customer, took a number, and waited 20 minutes until a junior account manager named Mr. Henderson called me to his glass-walled cubicle. When I placed my identification on the desk and asked for the full transaction history of the Sinclair Legacy sub-account ending in 409, Mr. Henderson frowned at his screen. He tapped his keyboard a few times, his brow furrowing deeper with every keystroke. He told me that the account was flagged as a high-priority trust vehicle and usually handled by the senior wealth management team. I told him that I was the sole beneficiary listed on the account, and I had the legal right to see the statements immediately. He printed them out. It was a stack of paper an inch thick. I took the documents to a coffee shop 3 blocks away, sat in the back corner, and began to read. The coffee went cold before I even finished the first page. The total amount transferred out of the account over the last 24 months was $352,000. $352,000. I stared at the number, feeling a physical blow to my chest. That was not just spare change. That was life-changing money. That was a house. That was a retirement fund. That was the security I had been working 80-hour weeks to build for myself, while my family had been stripping it away from me wire transfer by wire transfer. But it was not just the amount that made my stomach churn, it was the method. Next to every withdrawal, in the column for authorization, there was no digital signature from me. There was no biometric verification. Instead, there was a code, FAM-AUTHE-77. I called the bank's helpline right there in the coffee shop, fighting to keep my voice steady. I asked what that code meant. The operator put me on hold for 10 minutes. When she came back, she sounded hesitant. She explained that it stood for Family Authorization Protocol, a clause in the original trust setup that allowed designated family guardians to access beneficiary funds for emergency maintenance and welfare. I hung up the phone and looked at the transaction dates again. I opened my laptop and pulled up my own personal calendar. Cross-referencing the dates with my family's social media history and public records, the patterns emerged with sickening clarity. On August 12th of last year, a transfer of $45,000 was made to a shell company called Urban Horizon LLC. I looked up the company. It was the holding entity for Mason's second startup, the one he claimed had secured an angel investor to save it from bankruptcy. The angel investor wasn't an outsider. It was me. Or rather, it was my money, stolen to prop up his failure. On March 3rd, a withdrawal of $60,000 was made to a luxury contractor. 2 weeks later, my mother posted photos on Facebook of her newly remodeled chef's kitchen with imported marble countertops. She had captioned the photo, "So blessed to finally have the kitchen of my dreams. Hard work pays off." It wasn't her hard work. It was my inheritance. On December 20th, right before Christmas, $20,000 went to a dealership. My father drove up to Christmas dinner in a new SUV that year. Telling everyone he had received a generous year-end bonus, I closed the folder. I felt 17 years old again, sitting in the kitchen being told there was no money for my summer program while Mason packed for Aspen. But the feeling was different this time. At 17, I felt helpless. At 34, holding the evidence in my hands, I felt dangerous. I drove straight to my parents' house. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and I knew they would be home. My father was consulting from his home office, and my mother was likely planning her next charity luncheon. When I walked into the house, the smell of potpourri and expensive cleaning products hit me. It was the smell of a perfect life. I found them in the sunroom. My mother was arranging hydrangeas in a crystal vase. My father was reading a golf magazine. They looked up. Surprised to see me in the middle of the workday, I didn't say hello. I dropped the stack of bank statements onto the glass coffee table. The sound was heavy, a dull thud that silenced the room. "I went to the bank," I said. My voice was low, devoid of the trembling I felt inside. "I know about the sub-account. I know about the $350,000. My mother paused with a hydrangea stem in her hand. She looked at the papers, then at my father. She didn't look guilty. She looked annoyed, as if I had tracked mud onto her white carpet. My father sighed, closing his magazine. He took off his reading glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Savannah, really? You barging in here like this? We were going to discuss this with you at the appropriate time." "The appropriate time," I repeated. "Was that going to be before or after you drained the rest of it? You spent $45,000 on Mason's failed company. You renovated this kitchen with my money." My father stood up, his face hardening. "It is not your money, Savannah. It is the family's money. Grandma Eleanor set up those structures years ago to ensure we all had liquidity when we needed it. Your name is on that account for tax convenience. It is a pass-through entity to lower the estate's overall liability. You know how complex these things are." "Tax convenience," I said, feeling the absurdity of the lie wash over me. "So you forged my authorization code for tax convenience. You bought a car for tax convenience. My mother stepped forward, her voice taking on that soothing, condescending tone she used when I was a child. Savannah, honey, you are overreacting. You have a good job. You have your own apartment. You're doing so well. Why are you begrudging your brother a little help? He's trying to build something, and your father needed a reliable vehicle to get to his meetings. We are a family. We share. We don't share, I said. You have always taken. Does Grandma know? Does she know you are using a family authorization clause to bypass her signature requirements? The room went deadly silent. My father's eyes narrowed. Do not bring your grandmother into this. She is frail. She is recovering from a stroke. If you go to her with these petty accusations, you will kill her. Is that what you want? Do you want to be responsible for giving her another stroke over some accounting technicalities? It was the ultimate trump card, the weaponization of Grandma's health. It is not an accounting technicality, I said. It is theft. It is only theft if you prosecute, my father said coldly, and you are not going to prosecute your own parents. Savannah, you are not that kind of person. I looked at them, really looked at them. I realized then that they didn't see me as a daughter. They saw me as an asset class. I was a resource to be mined, a signature to be exploited, and a silence to be banked on. I turned around and walked out. I didn't slam the door. I just left. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Mason. Dad told me you are freaking out about the trust fund stuff. Seriously, if you really loved this family, you wouldn't make a scene over money. It's just paper. Vanna, Grandma would want us to look out for each other. Don't be a brat. I stared at the screen. Don't be a brat. That was what he used to say when he broke my toys and I cried about it. I didn't reply. Instead, I took a screenshot of the text. I saved it to a folder on my phone titled Evidence. Then the group chat lit up. It was a message from Aunt Loretta to the Sinclair Inner Circle group, which included me, my parents, Mason, and a few other cousins. I am hearing some very disturbing things about greed tearing us apart today. She wrote, Savannah, sweetheart, I know you are proud of your independence, but please remember that Mason is struggling to find his footing. You have a steady paycheck. He is an entrepreneur. Strong families support the weakest links. Don't let money turn your heart cold. You are stronger than this. I read the message 3 times. Don't be greedy. They were stealing from me, and I was the greedy one for noticing. They had inverted reality so completely that in their minds, I was the villain for wanting to keep the money that was legally mine. I felt a hot tear slide down my cheek, but I wiped it away angrily. I was done crying. I screenshotted the group chat. I screenshotted the timestamp. I screenshotted the list of red receipts to show that my parents had seen it and said nothing to defend me. I drove back to the city, but I didn't go home. I went to an office building in the financial district, to a firm that was a direct competitor to the lawyers my grandmother used. I had an appointment with Elena Russo, a forensic attorney known for being a shark in a skirt suit. I sat in her office and laid everything out. The bank statements, the screenshots, the history of the family authorization clause. Elena listened without interrupting. She looked at the papers with eyes that had seen every kind of white-collar crime imaginable. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and took off her glasses. This is not a gray area, Savannah, she said. Her voice was crisp, cutting through the fog of gaslighting my family had created. This is abuse of power of attorney, wire fraud, and embezzlement. The family authorization clause likely has a stipulation that funds must be used for the beneficiary's interest. Buying a luxury SUV for your father is not in your interest. Funding a shell company for your cousin is not in your interest. They are robbing you. They said it was for tax convenience, I said, feeling foolish even repeating it. They lied, Elena said simply. They are using your identity to bypass the main trust's controls. They are stealing from the estate, but they are routing it through you so that if the audit comes, you are the one who looks like the drain. She looked me dead in the eye. You have 2 choices. You can go home, accept that this money is the price of admission for being in this family, and let them drain the account to 0, or you can stop being their daughter and start being their creditor. I drove home in silence. The city lights blurred past me. I thought about the Christmas dinners. I thought about the way my mother fixed my hair and told me I was her good girl. I thought about Mason laughing at the dinner table, knowing his lifestyle was funded by the sister he mocked. I walked into my apartment and threw my bag on the floor. I didn't turn on the lights. I sat on the floor of my living room, surrounded by the shadows, and spread the bank statements out on the rug. I looked at the numbers. $352,000. It wasn't just the money. It was the disrespect. It was the absolute certainty they had that I would never fight back. They banked on my silence. They invested in my passivity. I remembered the 14-year-old girl who declined the summer program because she thought she was helping the family. I owed that girl an apology, and I owed her revenge. I stood up and walked to my desk. I turned on my high-powered workstation, the one I used to catch corporate fraudsters who thought they were smarter than the system. I opened a new case file. I didn't label it Mom and Dad. I didn't label it personal. I typed in the file name Sinclair Family Audit. I cracked my knuckles. I stopped looking at them as my relatives. I stripped away the titles of father, mother, aunt, cousin, in my mind. I replaced them with the labels I used at work: Subject A, Subject B, Subject C. I pulled up the first bank statement and started typing. Subject A, Robert Brooks, unauthorized vehicle purchase. Date 12/20. Amount $20,000. Evidence bank transfer 9982, matched with DMV registration records. Subject B, Mason Brooks. Misappropriation of funds for insolvent entity. Date 08/12. Amount $45,000. I typed until my fingers hurt. I typed until the sun came up. With every keystroke, the bridge back to my family burned a little brighter. And for the first time in my life, I didn't care about the smoke. I was building a case, and I never lost a case. The transformation of my apartment from a living space into a war room was immediate and total. I pushed my dining table against the wall and set up 3 monitors, creating a digital dashboard that would have looked at home in a federal investigation bureau. I was no longer Savannah Brooks, the compliant daughter who brought potato salad to family picnics. I was the lead auditor on the Sinclair file, and my objective was total transparency. I started with the bank statements I had retrieved, but they were just the surface debris of a much larger shipwreck. I needed to see the hull. Using my access to public property records, a tool I use daily at Halcyon Metrics Group, to check for hidden assets in corporate bankruptcies, I pulled the deed history for my parents' house and the downtown loft Mason was supposedly renting. What I found made the coffee turn sour in my stomach. My parents had taken out a home equity line of credit 3 months ago. That in itself was not illegal. But the collateral listed was not just their primary residence. It was a secondary property, a small lake house that belonged to the Sinclair Trust. To use that property as collateral, they needed the trustee's signature. That meant they needed Grandma Eleanor's signature. I downloaded the PDF of the loan agreement and zoomed in on the signature line at 400% magnification. At a glance, it looked like Eleanor Sinclair's sharp, angular script. But when I applied a pixel density filter, the truth revealed itself in jagged edges. The signature had not been written with a pen on paper. It had been lifted. It was a low-resolution scan, likely cropped from an old birthday card or a standard company memo, and pasted onto the loan document. They had forged the signature of a woman recovering from a stroke to secure a loan of $150,000. I printed the document and pinned it to the corkboard I had mounted on the wall. I labeled it Exhibit a Mortgage Fraud. Next, I turned my attention to Mason. He had bragged at the last Thanksgiving dinner about his new role in strategic expansion for Sinclair Harbor Holdings. He claimed Grandma had given him carte blanche to scout new warehouse locations. I called the corporate secretary at the holding company. Her name was Mrs. Higgins, a woman who had been with the company since before I was born and who had a soft spot for me because I always remembered her cat's birthday. I asked her for the minutes from the last 2 quarterly board meetings. I told her I was working on a legacy project for Grandma, compiling a history of the company's recent decisions. It was a lie, but a gentle one. Mrs. Higgins sent the files within the hour. I scoured the transcripts. I found the section where Mason presented his warehouse expansion plan. According to the minutes, when a board member asked about funding, Mason stated on the record that he had verbal and written authorization from the CEO to proceed with initial capital outlays. I cross-referenced this with the CEO's authorization log. A separate document Mrs. Higgins had included. There was no entry, no signature, no memo. Mason had lied to the board of directors. He had fabricated authority to siphon operating capital into his own pockets under the guise of scouting expenses. I printed the minutes. Exhibit B, corporate malfeasance. My phone rang. It was Elena Russo, my attorney. I had retained her formally the day before, paying her retainer with my own savings. She skipped the pleasantries. She told me that because we were in a one-party consent state regarding audio recordings, I was legally allowed to record any conversation I was a participant in without informing the other party. She advised me to start talking to them. She told me to get them comfortable. She told me to get them to admit it in their own words. I bought a high-fidelity digital recorder and spliced it into my landline. I also installed a recording app on my cell phone that automatically archived every incoming and outgoing call to an encrypted cloud server. Then, I called my father. It was a Thursday evening. I kept my voice steady, injecting just enough wobble to sound like the scared, confused daughter they wanted me to be. I asked him about the sub-account again. I told him I was worried about taxes. I told him I didn't understand how I was supposed to report the $350,000 on my IRS forms if I hadn't spent it. My father fell for it immediately. He adopted his paternal, soothing tone. He told me not to worry about the IRS. He said he had a guy who handled the creative accounting. Then he said the words that would eventually hang him. "Savannah, listen to me," he said, his voice clear on the recording. "We only borrowed that money temporarily. It is a liquidity bridge. The market is tight right now. Once the warehouse deal goes through the one Mason is working on, we will put every cent back into the sub-account before your grandmother ever sees a statement. It is a zero-sum game. Nobody gets hurt." "But Grandma didn't sign for it," I pressed gently. "Does she know?" "She doesn't need to know the sausage making, Savannah," he snapped, losing patience. "She is old. She gets confused. We are protecting her from the stress of these details. We are doing this for her." I ended the call and saved the file. Exhibit C. Admission of intent to conceal. 2 days later, I got Mason. He called me, asking if I could lend him $2,000 for incidental expenses because his credit card was maxed out. I asked him why he needed money if his company was doing so well. "Look, Vanna," he said, sounding desperate. "The cash flow is just jammed up in escrow. I swear, as soon as the trust releases the next quarterly dividend, I am good." "What if Grandma finds out about the withdrawals from my account?" I asked. Mason laughed. It was a dark, ugly sound. "If the old bat knew, she would probably kill me. Seriously, she would cut me out of the will so fast my head would spin. But she is not going to know, because you are not going to tell her, because you know that if you take me down, the whole house of cards falls, and Mom and Dad go down with me. You don't have the stomach for that." I saved the file. Exhibit D. Acknowledgement of guilt and coercion. I was gathering ammunition, but I needed a fortress to store it in. I called Ava and Jonas. They came over on a Saturday night with pizzas and a grim determination. Ava, who worked in cybersecurity at our firm, took one look at my laptop and shook her head. She spent the next 4 hours hardening my digital life. She set up 2-factor authentication on every account I owned, using a hardware key that I had to physically plug into my device. She encrypted my hard drive. She created a dead man's switch for my data, ensuring that if I was locked out of my accounts, the evidence would automatically be sent to 3 separate secure servers. Jonas, the maritime lawyer, handled the physical security. He went with me to a private bank, not the one my family used, and we rented a safety deposit box. We put copies of the hard drive, the printed emails, and the certified bank records inside. "This is real, Savannah," Jonas said as we walked out of the bank vault. "This isn't family drama anymore. This is a RICO case waiting to happen. I nodded. I knew it was real. I just didn't know how dangerous it was until the email incident. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. I was at work, analyzing a spreadsheet for a client, when a notification popped up in my personal inbox. It was an email from Aunt Loretta. The subject line was, "Strategy for S." I opened it, confused. It was a forward. My father had sent an email to Aunt Loretta and Mason, and Aunt Loretta had replied, intending to copy my mother, Linda, but because my email address was saved in her contacts right next to my mother's, and perhaps because she had been drinking her afternoon sherry, she had auto-completed my name instead. I read the email chain, and my blood ran cold. My father had written, "She is asking too many questions about the sub-account. The tax angle isn't working. She is getting suspicious." Aunt Loretta's reply, the one meant for my mother, was a paragraph of pure venom. "We need to change the narrative. Robert, if she threatens to go to Eleanor, we need to preempt her. We can tell Eleanor that Savannah has been acting erratically. We can say she is under immense stress at work and is having a breakdown. If we position her as mentally unstable, Eleanor won't trust anything she says. We can even suggest she needs a break. Maybe checking into that wellness center in Arizona for a few weeks. We have to neutralize her credibility before she opens her mouth. The updated medical power of attorney documents are ready if we need to push for a competency hearing." I stared at the screen. The air left my lungs. They weren't just planning to steal my money. They were planning to steal my mind. They were plotting to gaslight my grandmother into thinking I was insane so they could invalidate my testimony and potentially lock me away in a facility to keep me quiet. My hands shook so badly I could barely hit the print button. I printed 5 copies. I saved the email as a PDF. I forwarded it to Elena. I forwarded it to the encrypted server. I pinned the email to the very center of my corkboard. Exhibit E: conspiracy to commit fraud and unlawful restraint. I went to see Elena that evening. I placed the email on her desk. She read it, and her expression shifted from professional concern to cold fury. "This changes the landscape," Elena said. "This is not just financial crimes anymore. Savannah, this is a conspiracy to cause personal injury. They are discussing stripping you of your civil liberties to cover up their theft." She leaned forward. "But there is something else you need to consider. If they are willing to do this to you, their own flesh and blood, what do you think they are doing to Eleanor?" I looked at her, startled. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Elena said, tapping the file, "that your grandmother is the primary victim here. You are collateral damage. The real target is her estate. This is elder financial abuse of the highest order. They are forging her signature. They are leveraging her assets. They are relying on her declining health to rob her blind. If she does not know about this, she is in active danger. Every day they have power of attorney is a day they could liquidate everything she built." That hit me harder than the threat against myself. I had spent so much time protecting myself that I hadn't fully realized how vulnerable Grandma Eleanor was. She was the Iron Lady, the titan of industry. I always assumed she was invincible, but to my parents and Mason, she was just a dying host they were parasitizing. "I have to tell her," I said. "You do," Elena agreed. "But you cannot just walk in and tell her. She is 78. She loves them. Denial is a powerful drug. If you go to her with stories, she might choose to believe the comforting lie over the painful truth, especially if they have already started planting seeds about your instability." I thought about the text from Aunt Loretta. We have to neutralize her credibility. "I can't go to her as her granddaughter," I said, the realization settling over me like a heavy coat. "If I go as Savannah, the girl who used to bake cookies, I lose. They will outcry me. They will outhug me." "Exactly," Elena said. "You need to go to her as a professional. You need to present this not as a family tragedy, but as a forensic audit." I went home that night and looked at the corkboard. The evidence was there. The scanned signatures, the falsified minutes, the recordings, the emails plotting my demise. I was terrified. The little girl inside me was screaming, begging me not to do this, begging me not to blow up the family. She whispered that if I did this, there would be no more Christmases, No more birthdays, no more belonging. I would be an orphan in everything but name. But then I looked at the email from Aunt Loretta again. We have to neutralize her. They had already orphaned me. They had severed the bond the moment they decided my sanity was a fair price to pay for their new kitchens and sports cars. I sat down at my computer and opened a new document. I didn't write, "Dear Grandma." I typed a cover page. Investigative report. Financial irregularities within Sinclair Family Trust and subsidiary accounts. Prepared by Savannah Brooks, Senior Risk Analyst. Date October 24th. I spent the next 6 hours compiling the dossier. I scanned every exhibit. I transcribed the audio recordings, adding timestamps. I created flowcharts showing exactly where the money left the trust, where it was washed through my subaccount, and where it landed in their pockets. I bound the document in a simple black folder. It was 70 pages long. It was heavy. I decided then I would not call her. I would not ask for a meeting through the family secretary. I would wait for the right moment, a moment where I could get her alone, away from the interference of my father and the crocodile tears of my mother. I would show her the truth, but I would not ask her to believe me. I would force her to believe the numbers, because numbers, unlike family, never lied to protect your feelings. 3 days after I compiled the dossier, the summons came. It wasn't a legal subpoena, but in the Sinclair family. An invitation from Eleanor was functionally the same thing. Her personal assistant called me at work and said simply, "Mrs. Sinclair would like you to join her for tea this afternoon, alone." My stomach dropped. Alone could mean two things. Either I had been caught and was about to be excommunicated, or I was about to walk into a trap set by my parents. I left work early, clutching the black folder to my chest like a shield. The drive to the estate was a blur of gray coastline and anxiety. When I arrived, the house seemed larger and more imposing than usual. The butler led me not to the sunroom where we usually had tea, but to the library. This was Eleanor's sanctuary. It was a room of dark mahogany, smelling of old paper and tobacco smoke from my grandfather's era. The walls were lined with blueprints of the original harbor designs, yellowed with age, and shelves upon shelves of maritime law books. Eleanor was sitting in her wingback chair by the fireplace. She looked smaller than I remembered, wrapped in a cashmere shawl, but her eyes were as sharp as flint. There were no cookies, no tea sandwiches, just a silver pot of Earl Grey and 2 cups. "Sit down, Savannah," she said. Her voice was raspier than usual, but steady. I sat on the edge of the leather sofa opposite her. I placed the black folder on my lap, my hands sweating against the cover. "We don't have much time before your father starts calling to check on me," she said, pouring the tea herself. She didn't look at me while she poured. "So I will be direct. Are you investigating my accounts?" The question hit me like a physical blow. I froze. My mind raced. Had my father bugged my apartment? Had Mason hacked my computer? I started, my voice failing me. She set the teapot down and looked at me. "I received a notification from the bank's security division 2 days ago. They flagged an inquiry into a subaccount ending in 409. They said the beneficiary had requested full transaction history. That is you. Is it not?" I took a deep breath. There was no point in lying to Eleanor Sinclair. "Yes, Grandma. It is." I expected anger. I expected her to accuse me of greed, of trying to see how much I was worth. Instead, she let out a long, weary sigh and leaned back in her chair. "Thank God," she whispered. I blinked. "What?" "I was beginning to think everyone in this family was either a crook or a coward," she said. She reached into the magazine rack beside her chair and pulled out a manila envelope. She tossed it onto the coffee table between us. "Open it." I reached forward and opened the clasp. Inside were photocopies of documents. I recognized them immediately. They were loan agreements, dividend authorizations, and property transfers. But on closer inspection, I saw the shaky, erratic signatures at the bottom. "After my episode in November," Eleanor said, "I was foggy. The medication made me tired. Your father and Mason were very helpful. They brought me papers to sign. They said it was routine maintenance. insurance updates, tax filings. I signed them because I trusted them. I signed them because I was too tired to read the fine print. She looked at the fire. But then the fog cleared, and I started noticing things. I noticed that the dividends from the harbor operations were down 12%, yet Mason was driving a car that costs more than my first house. I noticed your father stopped complaining about his mortgage. She turned her gaze back to me. I knew they were skimming. I have known for years that they take a little off the top. I allowed it. I thought of it as a tax on my longevity, but 3 months ago, a $2 million capital injection for a new logistics hub vanished. It was listed as consulting fees to a firm I had never heard of. Urban Horizon LLC, I said automatically. Eleanor's eyebrows shot up. You know it. It is a shell company, I said. Registered in Delaware. The principal agent is Mason's college roommate. I lifted the black folder from my lap and placed it on the table next to her envelope. I didn't just look at my account. Grandma, I looked at everything. I opened the folder. I walked her through the mortgage fraud first. I showed her the magnified signature on my parents' loan. They didn't ask you to sign this one, I said softly. They forged it. They used a scan of your signature from a birthday card. Eleanor stared at the document. Her hand trembled slightly as she traced the jagged line of her own name. They pledged the lake house, she murmured. My husband built that house. There is more, I said. I turned the page to the transcript of the recording with my father. I didn't play the audio. I didn't want to subject her to his voice right now. But I let her read the words. We are protecting her from the stress. She is old. She gets confused. She read it in silence. Her face hardened. The sadness replaced by a cold, terrifying resolve. Then I turned to the last exhibit, the email from Aunt Loretta, the plan to commit me to a facility. They found out I was looking, I said. This is their contingency plan. They want to paint me as mentally unstable, so that if I came to you, you wouldn't believe me. Eleanor read the email. She read it twice. When she looked up, there were tears in her eyes, but they were not tears of grief. They were tears of fury. They would do this to you, she asked, her voice shaking. To their own blood, to cover up theft. They are scared, Grandma. I said, people do terrible things when they are scared of losing a lifestyle they didn't earn. She closed the folder. She closed her eyes for a moment, composing herself. When she opened them, she was the CEO again. Savannah, she said, if I gave you the power, absolute power to handle this, what would you do if I put you in the position of the only person I trust? How would you handle your own parents? I looked at her. I thought about the easy answer. I could say we should just cut them off. I could say we should just yell at them. But I was a risk analyst. I dealt in facts and consequences. I would treat it like a corporate embezzlement case, I said, my voice steady. I would freeze all assets immediately to prevent capital flight. I would revoke all powers of attorney. I would commission a full forensic audit dating back 5 years. And I would present them with a choice restitution and resignation from all family trusts or criminal prosecution. I paused. Even if they are my parents, even if it breaks the family. Eleanor looked at me for a long time. It would destroy your relationship with them, she said. They destroyed the relationship when they decided to frame me for fraud. I replied, I am just filing the paperwork. A small, grim smile touched Eleanor's lips. You are your grandfather's granddaughter. Finally. She picked up a small silver bell from the table and rang it. The library door opened, and Mr. Calder walked in. I hadn't realized he was in the house. He was carrying a briefcase and looked like he had been waiting for this cue. You were right, Eleanor, Mr. Calder said, nodding at me. She has the data. She has more than the data, Arthur, Eleanor said. She has the spine. Mr. Calder sat down next to me. Savannah, your grandmother and I have been drafting a new estate plan for the last month. We suspected the fraud, but we needed proof. We needed an insider who wasn't compromised. We needed to know if you were one of them, Eleanor added, or if you were a victim. Now we know you are neither. You are the prosecutor. She leaned forward. Here is the plan. We are going to let them think they are safe for one more week. We need them to sign a few things: confirmations of debt, acknowledgments of their roles in these shell companies. We will frame it as routine compliance for the bank. They will sign anything if they think it keeps the money flowing. And then, I asked. And then, Eleanor said, we have a dinner next Friday. I want everyone there. I want them to sit at my table, drink my wine, and think they have gotten away with it one last time. A trap, I said. An accountability hearing. Mr. Calder corrected. We will use the dinner to play the evidence. We will use the recordings. We will force them to confront their own voices. Eleanor looked at the black folder. I want you to be the one to bring this, she said, tapping the cover. I want you to sit there and hold the sword, because they need to see that it wasn't me who caught them. It was the girl they underestimated. Why me? I asked. Why not just have Mr. Calder do it? Because, Eleanor said, her voice softening, they don't fear Mr. Calder. They think he is just an employee. They think I am a senile old woman. But you represent their failure. You are the mirror they refuse to look into. If you do this, Savannah, you are not just saving my money. You are saving yourself from a lifetime of being their victim. Can you do that? I thought about the sub-account. I thought about the mental instability email. I thought about the years of being told I wasn't good enough, wasn't smart enough, wasn't deserving enough. I looked at my grandmother. For the first time, I didn't see a distant matriarch. I saw a partner. I'll do it, I said, but on one condition. Name it, Eleanor said. When it is over, I said. I don't want any part of their rehabilitation. I don't want to be the one who helps them find jobs or apartments. I want to be done. I want to be free. Eleanor nodded. Done. The new trust structure will have you as the primary trustee, but with a clause that explicitly forbids you from providing financial assistance to any family member who has been removed for cause. You will be legally bound to ignore them. Perfect, I said. We spent the next 2 hours going over the strategy. Mr. Calder showed me the new will. It was brutal in its simplicity. My parents and Mason were to be cut out entirely, receiving only a nominal sum to prevent them from contesting the will on the grounds that they were forgotten. The bulk of the estate would go into a charitable foundation, with me as the salaried director. When I left the library, the sun was setting over the harbor. The sky was a bruised purple. I walked to my car, my legs feeling lighter than they had in years. I looked back at the house. It didn't look like a prison anymore. It looked like a battlefield where I had finally chosen a side. My phone buzzed. It was a text from my mother. Savannah, are you okay? We haven't heard from you. We are just worried about your stress levels. Let us know if you need anything. I stared at the message, the fake concern, the subtle setup for the instability narrative. I typed back, I am fine. Mom, just working on a big project. I will see you at dinner next week. I got into my car and drove away. I didn't turn on the radio. I just listened to the sound of the tires on the pavement, a steady, rhythmic drumbeat marching toward the end of the world. The week leading up to the dinner was a masterclass in silent warfare. While my family was busy plotting how to paint me as mentally unstable, Eleanor, Mr. Calder, and I were systematically dismantling their financial existence from the inside out. It was quiet work, performed in the hushed conference rooms of downtown law firms and the secure servers of private banks, but its impact would be louder than any scream. We started by moving the liquid assets. In the span of 48 hours, we transferred nearly 60% of the Sinclair estate's cash reserves into 3 newly formed blind trusts. These trusts were fortresses, designed with ironclad protective clauses that stripped away every unchecked power my father and aunt had enjoyed for decades. The new bylaws required triple authorization for any withdrawal over $500, and one of those signatures had to be mine. The beauty of the plan was that we did not have to tell them we were cutting them off. We just told them we were updating the plumbing. Mr. Calder sent out a memo on Monday morning, flagged as High Importance Banking Compliance Update. The email explained that due to new federal regulations regarding high net worth family trusts, all authorized users needed to sign updated power of attorney forms and migrate their access credentials to a new secure portal. It was the kind of bureaucratic headache that my father hated but never questioned. To him, paperwork was just the toll he paid to access the bridge. I sat in my office at Halcyon Metrics Group, watching the read receipts roll in. My father opened the email at 9 in the morning. Mason opened it at noon. Aunt Loretta forwarded it to her personal assistant almost immediately. They were annoyed. Sure, I could practically hear my father grumbling about government overreach, but they were not suspicious. They assumed the river of money would keep flowing, just through a slightly different pipe. Then came the trap. Embedded in the stack of compliance documents was a single page titled Affidavit of Financial Integrity. It was a standard-looking form, filled with legal jargon, but its purpose was lethal. By signing it, the signatory attested under penalty of perjury that they had never utilized Sinclair Trust assets for personal gain, had never authorized transactions on behalf of another beneficiary without express written consent, and had never acted in a way that diminished the value of the estate for other heirs. Mr. Calder and I sat in his office, staring at the digital dashboard as the signatures came in. My father signed it first. I could almost picture him, sitting at his mahogany desk, scribbling his name with that arrogant flourish of his, thinking that a piece of paper could never hurt him. He believed he was the patriarch. He believed that even if he was caught, his mother would never sue her own son. He banked on sentimental immunity. He was wrong. By signing that document, he wasn't just lying. He was handing us the nail for his own coffin. If we took this to court, that signature converted his borrowing into criminal fraud and perjury. Mason signed 2 hours later. Aunt Loretta signed before dinner. They had all just sworn, legally, that they hadn't done the exact things I had 300 pages of evidence proving they had done, while they were signing their lives away. I was working with the bank's forensic unit. I had formally requested a trace and verify report on the sub-account. The bank was horrified by what they found. They produced a certified dossier linking the IP addresses of the withdrawal requests directly to my parents' home router and Mason's cell phone. They matched the geolocations. They even recovered the device IDs. There was no tax convenience excuse that could survive this. The data showed a clear pattern. Mason would text my father about a bill, and 40 minutes later, a withdrawal would be made from my account using a forged digital token. It was a synchronized dance of theft. But the hardest part wasn't the paperwork. It was the Sunday brunch. 3 days before the final showdown. My mother insisted we all get together for brunch at the club. It was a family wellness check, she said, which was code for, let's make sure Savannah is calm before we declare her crazy. I wore a pastel dress. I smiled. I drank my mimosa. And I recorded every single word. The conversation turned to money, as it always did. Mason was complaining about the delay in his warehouse project funding, the funding that Mr. Calder had quietly frozen that morning. It is just a glitch, my father assured him, cutting into his eggs Benedict. The new banking system is slow. Once it clears, we will move another $50,000 into your operating account. We can pull it from the sub-account if the main line is still pending. I don't know, Dad, Mason said, glancing at me. Savannah was asking questions about that account. Maybe we should lay off it for a while. My father laughed. It was a sound that made my skin crawl. Mason, relax. It is all one big pot. Whether it has her name on it or mine, it all comes from the same place, and it will all end up in the same place. Eventually, Grandma will be gone, and we will have to consolidate everything anyway. We are just advancing the inheritance. It is efficient. Efficient, I repeated softly, touching the phone in my purse to ensure the recording app was running. So you think Grandma would be okay with it, as an advance? Grandma is a businesswoman. Aunt Loretta chimed in, swirling her iced tea. She understands that money needs to move to be useful. Sitting in an account for you to look at isn't useful. Sweetheart, we are putting it to work. Besides, my father added, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper, we are the ones taking care of the legacy. You have your little job. Savannah, you are fine. You don't need the burden of managing this kind of wealth. We are doing you a favor. I smiled at him. Thank you. Dad, I appreciate you looking out for me. I went home and uploaded the file to the secure server. I titled it, Exhibit F Conspiracy to Misappropriate Funds. The next morning, the cracks started to show. Aunt Loretta, who was more intuitive than the men, started to sense a shift in the wind. She noticed that Eleanor hadn't returned her calls for 2 days. She noticed that the compliance update was taking longer than expected to process. She panicked, and when Aunt Loretta panicked, she lashed out. My phone lit up with a message from her in the family group chat. Savannah, I hope you are not bothering Grandma with your anxieties. She seemed very tired when I spoke to the nurse. If you are putting stress on her with your conspiracy theories about the accounts, you need to stop. We are all worried about your mental state. But don't drag her down with you. I didn't reply. I just screenshotted it. Then, 10 minutes later, another text. I spoke to Dr. Eris. He agrees that your behavior lately, the paranoia, the obsession with numbers is concerning. We are looking into getting you some help. Please don't make this hard on your parents. It was a threat wrapped in medical concern. She was building the paper trail for my institutionalization. She was trying to discredit me in advance, just in case I decided to speak up. I printed the texts and added them to the physical file. They were digging their own graves with their thumbs. Then came the invitation. It arrived on Tuesday via courier, heavy cream cardstock, embossed with the Sinclair crest. It wasn't an email, it was formal. Eleanor Sinclair requests the pleasure of your company for a special family dinner to discuss the future of the estate. The word future set off a bomb in the family. My phone rang almost instantly. It was Mason. Did you get the invite? He asked, his voice tight. What does she mean by future of the estate? Did she talk to you? She invited me just like she invited you, I said, keeping my voice neutral. I assume she wants to talk about the new compliance measures. I don't like it, Mason said. She never does formal dinners on a Friday, and Calder's going to be there. I saw his name on the CC list for the catering. Why is the lawyer coming to dinner? Maybe he's hungry, I said. This isn't funny. Savannah, Mason snapped. I called a lawyer, my own lawyer, just in case. Why would you need a lawyer for dinner with your grandmother? I asked. He hung up. The next 2 days were a study in hypocrisy. My parents, terrified that the future of the estate might involve changes they didn't control, suddenly decided to love me. My mother showed up at my apartment with a casserole. She hadn't visited my apartment in 2 years. She stood in my living room, looking around at my modest furniture with a strained smile. It is so cozy here, she said. Savannah, about the dinner. If Grandma asks you anything about the accounts, or the car, or anything, I want you to let your father handle it. He has the context. You know how easily you get confused by the big picture. I know, Mom, I said, taking the casserole. I get confused easily. Exactly, she said, touching my cheek. We just want to make sure the evening goes smoothly. We are a team. Remember the Brooks team? I remember, I said, when she left. I threw the casserole in the trash. I wasn't going to eat anything she gave me, not anymore. On the morning of the dinner, I went to the estate early. I met Eleanor and Mr. Calder in the library. The room felt like a command center. The table was covered in documents. Is it ready? Eleanor asked. She looked regal, dressed in a dark navy suit that made her look more like a judge than a grandmother. It is ready, Mr. Calder said. He slid a heavy document toward me. This is the final draft of the last will and testament of Eleanor Sinclair. I opened it. I read the clauses we had discussed, but seeing them in black and white gave them a terrifying permanence. Article 4. The disinheritance. I, Eleanor Sinclair, knowingly and intentionally limit the inheritance of my son, Robert Brooks, my daughter-in-law, Linda Brooks, my daughter, Loretta Sinclair, and my grandson, Mason Brooks, to the sum of $1,000 each. This limitation is not an oversight. It is a direct consequence of their breach of fiduciary duty, their unauthorized use of estate assets, and their conspiracy to defraud the estate, as documented in the attached forensic audit report. I looked up at Mr. Calder. You attach the audit to the will. It becomes a public record when the will is probated, Mr. Calder said, a small shark-like smile playing on his lips. If they try to contest the will, if they try to claim Eleanor was incompetent or manipulated, the audit becomes public immediately. Every wire transfer, every forged signature, every recording, it will all be available for the world to read. It is a poison pill, I realized. They can't fight the will without exposing their own crimes. Exactly, Eleanor said. They can take the $1,000 and disappear. Or they can fight for more and go to prison. That is the choice I'm giving them. Then she turned the page to the next section. Article 5. The Sinclair Accountability Foundation. All remaining assets, real estate, and holdings are to be transferred to the Sinclair Accountability Foundation. The sole trustee and executive director of this foundation shall be Savannah Brooks. The director shall have absolute discretion over the liquidation and management of assets. The director is expressly forbidden from using foundation funds to provide personal financial assistance, loans, or employment to the individuals named in Article 4. I stared at my name. It wasn't just an inheritance. It was a job. It was a responsibility. And it was a restraining order. You are legally binding me to ignore them, I said. I am protecting you from your own guilt, Eleanor said. 10 years from now, when they are broke and begging, you might feel sorry for them. This clause forbids you from helping them even if you want to. You can tell them, I am sorry. It is against the bylaws. My hands are tied. She handed me a pen. It was a heavy gold fountain pen. I need a witness, she said. I want you to witness this version of the will. I want your signature right next to mine. I want them to know that you were here, that you saw me sign it, and that you were of sound mind and body when you did it. I took the pen. My hand hovered over the paper. I thought about my father's voice on the recording. We are doing you a favor. I thought about the text from Mason. Don't be a brat. I thought about Aunt Loretta's email plotting to lock me away. I wasn't signing a will. I was signing a Declaration of Independence. I was signing the end of my childhood and the beginning of my life. I pressed the pen to the paper. The ink flowed black and permanent. Savannah Brooks. I dated it. I handed the pen back to Eleanor. It is done, I said. Not yet, Eleanor said, standing up. Now comes the hard part. Now we have to serve them dinner. She walked to the window and looked out at the driveway. They are arriving, she said. I can see Mason's car. He parked in my spot. I stood up and walked to the window. I saw them getting out of their cars. My father was adjusting his tie in the reflection of the window. My mother was checking her lipstick. Mason was looking at his phone, probably checking his bank balance, hoping the glitch had been fixed. They looked so confident. They looked so secure in their theft. I picked up the black folder containing the audit, the recordings, and the signed affidavits. I held it against my chest. Let's go, I said to my grandmother. I think they are hungry. We walked out of the library together, not as grandmother and granddaughter, but as the prosecution team entering the courtroom. The hallway was long and filled with the portraits of our ancestors, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I was shrinking under their gaze. I felt like I was finally standing tall enough to look them in the eye. Tonight, the Sinclair family died. And tonight, Savannah Brooks was finally born. The days leading up to the final dinner were not filled with the quiet anticipation of justice. They were filled with the chaotic noise of a hive that had just been kicked. The rumor that Eleanor Sinclair was rewriting her will had leaked. I suspected Mr. Calder had let it slip intentionally to flush out the rats, and if that was his strategy, It worked with terrifying efficiency. Suddenly, I was the most popular person in the Brooks family. Cousins I had not spoken to since I was 12 years old were sliding into my direct messages, asking to grab coffee. A second cousin from the West Coast, who usually only communicated via Christmas cards printed with photos of his dogs, called me on a Tuesday morning to ask about Grandma's health. He kept steering the conversation toward her mental clarity, asking if she was making any rash decisions. I told him she was sharper than ever. He hung up quickly after that. But the real pressure came from the inner circle. My parents realized that the compliance update was taking too long. They realized that their access to the funds had been choked off not for hours, but for days, and they realized that I was the only one not complaining. The call came on Wednesday night. It was my mother, but I could hear my father breathing heavily in the background, like a bull waiting to charge. "Savannah," my mother said, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and terror. "We just got off the phone with the bank. They said the sub-account is frozen pending an internal review. Did you authorize this? Did you tell them to look at it?" "I am the beneficiary, Mom," I said, sitting on my living room floor with my back against the sofa. "I asked for a routine audit. That is standard procedure." "Standard procedure," my father roared, snatching the phone. "You are freezing our liquidity. Savannah. Do you have any idea what you are doing? You are causing a cash crunch that could bankrupt Mason's company. You are risking the house. And for what? Because you are jealous. Because you want to prove a point. I want to know where $350,000 went," I said calmly. "It is money," my father shouted. "It is just money. You are going to destroy this entire family over a few $100,000. You are going to break your grandmother's heart because you are too selfish to share. If you say one word to her, Savannah, if you poison her against us, you will regret it. You will be the one ending up with nothing. Do you hear me? Nothing." I hung up. I didn't argue. I didn't try to explain that they had already taken everything that mattered. I just saved the call recording to the cloud. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a text from Mason. I opened it. It was a wall of text, devoid of punctuation, fueled by panic and probably whiskey. "I know what you're doing, Vanna. You think you are so smart with your little spreadsheets? You think you can cut me out. I built this family's reputation. I am the one out there hustling while you sit behind a desk. If you go to Grandma with some twisted story about me stealing, I will bury you. I know things about you too. I will tell everyone you are off your meds. I will tell them you are having a breakdown. If you drag me down, I will drag you down with me." I stared at the screen. My thumb hovered over the delete button, the instinct to erase the ugliness rising up. But the risk analyst in me took over. I took a screenshot. I opened my file management app. I created a new folder titled Threats. I moved the screenshot there. I did not reply. Silence was the only weapon they didn't know how to counter. The war moved to social media the next day. My cousin Sophie, the one whose braces were paid for with money skimmed from my tuition fund, posted a status update. She didn't tag me. She didn't name me. But the target was painted in neon. "It is truly heartbreaking when people you grow up with turn out to value money more than loyalty," she wrote. "Some people will burn down their own home just to warm their hands, praying for those blinded by greed and jealousy. Family is forever, even when some members forget that." I saw that Aunt Loretta had liked the post. My mother had commented with a praying hands emoji. It was a coordinated campaign. They were seeding the narrative. They were creating a public record of my greed, so that when the explosion happened, they could look at the wreckage and say, "See, we told you she was the problem." I felt a wave of isolation so profound it almost knocked the wind out of me. These were the people I had spent every holiday with. These were the people who had clapped at my graduation, and now they were cyberbullying me like high school mean girls because I had stopped letting them rob me. I closed my laptop. I couldn't do this alone. I called Ava and Jonas. "Code red," I said. "I need pizza, and I need people who don't share my DNA." They were at my door in 20 minutes. Jonas brought a 6-pack of beer and Ava brought the greasiest pepperoni pizza the city had to offer. We sat on my floor, surrounded by the evidence of my family's crimes. And we didn't talk about the case for the first hour. We watched a terrible reality show where people fought over wedding dresses. We laughed at things that weren't funny, just to feel the muscles in our faces work. You know, Jonas said, halfway through his third slice, gesturing to the corkboard on my wall. In maritime law, when a ship is sinking and the captain tries to throw the crew overboard to save the cargo, we call that barratry. It is a serious crime. What your family is doing, that is emotional barratry. They are trying to toss you to save their gold. They think I am the cargo, I said. They think I am just property they can jettison. Well, Ava said, clinking her beer bottle against mine, they are about to find out that the cargo is actually a torpedo. You are not alone in this. Savannah, we are your witnesses. If they try to say you are crazy, Jonas and I will stand up in court and testify that you are the sanest, most boringly organized person we know. Boringly organized, I asked, smiling for the first time in days. Detailed, Ava corrected. Let's go with detailed. That night, after they left, I started a journal. I didn't write about the money. I wrote about how I felt. I wrote about the fear. I wrote about the sadness. I documented my sleep patterns, my meals, my conversations. I knew that Aunt Loretta's strategy was to claim I was mentally unstable. A detailed, coherent, contemporaneous journal was the best defense against a competency hearing. If they tried to say I was having a breakdown on Thursday, I could open my journal and show that on Thursday I was actually feeling quite calm, ate a turkey sandwich, and watched a documentary about penguins. Reasonableness was my shield. Friday night, the night before the dinner, the phone rang. It was late, past 10 o'clock. The caller ID said Grandma Eleanor. I picked it up, my heart hammering. Grandma. Savannah, she said. Her voice sounded tired, stripped of the iron command she usually carried. I am looking at the seating chart for tomorrow. I put you next to me. That sounds safe? I said. Savannah, she said, and there was a long pause. You can stop. You know that, right? You can call me tomorrow morning and say you have the flu. You can stay home. Mr. Calder and I can handle the legalities. You don't have to sit there and watch their faces when the axe falls. I don't want you to carry a scar from this that never heals. I looked out my window. The street below was empty, bathed in the orange glow of the streetlights. I thought about the 14-year-old girl who was told she couldn't go to art camp. I thought about the woman who found a bank account in her name drained of $350,000. If I don't come, I said softly, I am just the victim again. I am the little girl hiding in her room while the adults talk. I need to be there. Grandma, not for you, for me. It will be ugly, she warned. It is already ugly, I said. This is just turning on the light so we can see the mess. I didn't want this for you, she whispered. I wanted to leave you a legacy, not a war. You are leaving me the truth, I said. That is enough. Okay, she said. Get some sleep. You will need your strength. Saturday morning broke with a gray, oppressive sky. The phone stopped ringing. The texts stopped coming. It was the silence of the trench before the whistle blows. My family had said their piece. They had threatened. They had begged. They had smeared. Now they were holding their breath, waiting to see if their intimidation had worked. I spent the morning in a ritual of preparation. I didn't just trust the cloud. I printed everything. I printed the bank statements. I printed the forged mortgage documents. I printed the email from Aunt Loretta about the mental facility. I printed the screenshot of Mason's threat. I printed Sophie's Facebook post. I took a thick, waterproof envelope and placed every sheet inside. I sealed it. I put it in my large leather tote bag. This was my failsafe. If the power went out, if the internet went down, if they smashed my phone, I would still have the paper. I showered and dressed. I chose a suit, not a dress. A dark charcoal suit, tailored and sharp. It was the kind of outfit I wore when I had to fire a client for unethical practices. It was armor. I looked in the mirror. I didn't look like the Savannah they knew. My eyes were harder. My posture was stiffer. I looked like someone who had already survived the worst thing that could happen to them. I grabbed my keys and the bag. I walked out to my car. The air smelled of rain and salt from the harbor. I got in and started the engine. My phone buzzed one last time as I pulled out of the parking garage. It was a text from a number I didn't recognize. A burner phone, probably, or maybe a cousin who hadn't saved my number. If you still consider Eleanor to be family, don't break her heart tonight. She is too old for your drama. Turn the car around. I stared at the message. It was a final, desperate attempt to weaponize my empathy. They were trying to make me feel like the aggressor. They were trying to make me feel like protecting my grandmother from theft was actually hurting her. I looked at the words, "Turn the car around." I laughed. It was a short, dry sound. I deleted the message. I put the phone in the passenger seat. I shifted the car into drive. I didn't turn around. I merged onto the highway, heading north toward the bay, driving straight into the storm that I had summoned. The wind outside the bay windows had picked up, battering the glass with a rhythmic intensity that matched the pounding of my heart. We were back in the dining room, the scene of the crime, or rather, the scene of the sentencing. The first course had been cleared away by silent staff who seemed to sense the radioactive tension in the air. They moved like shadows, taking away half-eaten plates of lobster bisque and refilling wine glasses that were being drained far too quickly. I sat at the far end of the table, my hands folded in my lap, resting directly on top of the heavy leather bag that contained the envelope. To my left, my mother was shredding a linen napkin into unrecognizable threads, her eyes darting nervously toward the head of the table. To my right, Mason was checking his watch for the fourth time in 10 minutes, his leg bouncing under the table with a frantic energy that shook the silverware. Grandma Eleanor sat at the head of the table, a queen on her throne. She looked small in the high-backed velvet chair, but her presence filled the room. She took a sip of water, placed the glass down with a deliberate click, and cleared her throat. The sound was soft, but it silenced the room instantly. "I have been thinking a lot about time," Eleanor began. Her voice was lower than usual, lacking its typical command, replaced by a wistful, fragile tone that I knew was a performance. "At my age, you realize that time is the only asset you cannot leverage. It is a diminishing resource, and I fear my account is running low." A heavy, performative silence settled over the table. I saw Aunt Loretta reach for a handkerchief, dabbing at dry eyes. "Oh, Mother, don't talk like that," Loretta sniffled, her voice trembling with practiced theatricality. "You have plenty of years left. You are strong." "We are all here for you, Grandma," Mason added, leaning forward with a look of deep concern that did not quite reach his shark-like eyes. "Whatever you need. We handle it. That is what family is for." Eleanor smiled. It was a sad, tired smile. "I know you do. Mason, I know you all do so much. That is why I wanted to gather you here. I wanted to make sure everything was clear before it is too late. I hate loose ends. I have spent my entire life tying knots, ensuring that nothing could unravel." She looked around the room, her gaze lingering on the oil paintings of the ships that had started the Sinclair Empire. "I built Sinclair Harbor Holdings from a single dock and a rusted tugboat," she said, her voice gaining a little strength. "I didn't build it with money. I didn't build it with connections. I built it because I had a talent, a specific, dangerous talent." She paused. My father leaned in, looking eager, probably expecting a business anecdote he could use in his next board meeting. "I could see things," Eleanor said. "I could look at a manifest and know if the weight was off by 100 pounds. I could look at a contract and find the loophole in the margin. But mostly, I could look at a man across a negotiation table and know, with absolute certainty, if he was lying to me." The air in the room shifted. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. My father stiffened. Mason stopped bouncing his leg. Eleanor turned her gaze back to the table. She wasn't looking at the ships anymore. She was looking at us. "I lost that ability for a while," she confessed softly. "Or perhaps I just chose to close my eyes because I didn't want to see what was sitting right in front of me. But the fog has cleared, and the vision has returned. She placed her hands flat on the table. "There has been a lot of whispering in this family lately," she said. "Whispers about my health, whispers about my mind, whispers about my money. You have all been talking to each other, planning for a future without me in it." "Mother, that is not true," my father interrupted, his voice booming with false indignation. "We are only concerned with preserving your legacy." "Legacy," Eleanor repeated the word, tasting it. "Yes, that is the word of the night. But here is the problem. A legacy is built on truth, and this table is drowning in lies." She leaned forward, and the frailty vanished. The grandmother was gone. The CEO was back. "Only one of you knows the truth," she said. Her voice was razor-sharp, cutting through the heavy air like a knife. "Only one of you knows exactly why we are here tonight, and only one of you had the courage to bring that truth into this room." Her eyes swept the table, moving from Mason to Loretta, to my father, and finally, they stopped on me. She didn't say my name. She didn't nod. She just looked at me with a terrifying intensity. The reaction was chaotic. "What is she talking about?" Mason demanded, looking around wildly. He glared at the empty chairs, then at the staff, then at me. "Who? What truth?" "It is probably that lawyer." Aunt Loretta hissed, glaring at Mr. Calder, who sat silently in the corner. "He has been poisoning her mind. Robert, I told you, he is trying to cut us out." My father ignored them. He was looking at me. I saw the realization dawn on him in slow motion. I saw him connect the dots, the frozen sub-account, my refusal to sign the papers, my silence in the group chat, the compliance delays. He looked at my face, which was devoid of the fear he was used to seeing. He looked at the heavy bag on my lap. His face went slack. The color drained from his cheeks, leaving them a sickly gray. "Savannah," he whispered. It wasn't a greeting. It was a plea. My mother turned to me, her eyes wide. She reached out a hand across the table, her fingers trembling. "Savannah, honey, did you say something to Grandma? You know how she gets confused. Tell her we are a team." Her eyes were begging me, "Please." They said, "Please don't break the illusion. Please be the good girl one last time." But behind the begging, there was a threat. I saw it in the set of her jaw. "If you do this, you are dead to us." I didn't take her hand. I didn't speak. I just held my grandmother's gaze. Eleanor nodded once. It was the signal. "Mr. Calder," Eleanor said, "if you please." Mr. Calder stood up. He didn't open a file. He didn't start reading a legal brief. He walked to the center of the table, moving the flower arrangement aside. He placed a small, sleek digital voice recorder on the white tablecloth. "What is this?" Mason asked, his voice rising an octave. "Is this legal? You can't record us." "In this state, under these circumstances, I certainly can." "Mr. Calder said calmly, "This is Exhibit C." He pressed the play button. The silence in the room was absolute, and then my father's voice filled the air. It was clear, crisp, and undeniable. "She is asking too many questions about the sub-account. The tax angle isn't working. We need to change the narrative. Robert, if she threatens to go to Eleanor, we need to preempt her. We can tell Eleanor that Savannah has been acting erratically. We can say she is under immense stress at work and is having a breakdown. We have to neutralize her credibility before she opens her mouth." The recording stopped. The silence that followed was heavier than anything I had ever experienced. It was the sound of a guillotine blade hanging at the top of its arc. My father sat frozen. He looked like he had been struck by lightning. He opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked at Eleanor, then at me, then at the recorder. "That," he stammered, his voice a dry croak. "That is manipulated. That is AI, or it is out of context." "Mother." We were worried about her. She was acting crazy. We were trying to protect her from herself. "Protect me," I said. It was the first time I had spoken. My voice was quiet. but it carried, by locking me in a facility, by invalidating my mind so you could keep spending my money. Quiet, Eleanor commanded. She didn't look at my father. She looked at Mason. There is more, she said. Mr. Calder pressed the button again. This time, the voice was younger, arrogant, slurred with alcohol and confidence. It was Mason. Look, if the old bat knew, she would probably kill me. Seriously, she would cut me out of the will so fast my head would spin, but she is not going to know. Because you are not going to tell her. Because you know that if you take me down, the whole house of cards falls. I have sucked the marrow out of that account. Vanna, it is gone, and you are going to help me fill it back up. Click. Mason made a sound that was half gasp, half whimper. He pushed his chair back, the legs scraping violently against the hardwood floor. I was drunk, Mason shouted. Standing up, his face was bright red. I was just talking trash. I didn't mean it, Grandma. You know how I get. I was just trying to scare her because she was being annoying. I didn't steal anything. Sit down, Mason, Eleanor said. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. The authority in her tone was absolute. Mason looked at the door, then at his father, then at Eleanor. He sank back into his chair, defeated. Aunt Loretta was staring at the tablecloth, her face pale. She knew her emails were next. She knew that if the audio was this bad, the paper trail was worse. I have spent the last week listening to these, Eleanor said. I have listened to my son plot to declare my granddaughter insane. I have listened to my grandson laugh about stealing from the estate I built. I have listened to my daughter-in-law agree to forgery. She looked at my father. You said you were protecting me. You said I was old and confused. But looking at you now, Robert, you are the one who looks confused. My father put his head in his hands. Mother, please, we can explain. The market was tight. We were going to pay it back. We always pay it back. With whose money? Eleanor asked. With Savannah's. With mine. She turned her head slowly toward me. The entire table followed her gaze. I felt the weight of their hatred, their fear, and their desperation crashing against me. But I also felt the weight of the envelope in my bag. Savannah, Eleanor said softly, you brought something tonight. Do you want to speak? My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. My feet were cold in my heels. My hands were shaking slightly, but I clasped them together to steady them. I looked at my father, the man who had taught me to ride a bike and then taught me to lie to the IRS. I looked at my mother, the woman who had kissed my scraped knees and then plotted to put me in a psych ward. I looked at Mason, the cousin I had defended on the playground, who now wanted to drag me down to save himself. I realized then that I wasn't scared of them anymore. I was just done with them. I stood up. The movement was fluid, controlled. I reached into my bag and pulled out the thick, heavy envelope. I didn't throw it. I placed it gently on the table, right next to the recorder. I placed my hand flat on top of the documents. You told me to be quiet, I said, looking directly at my father. You told me to be a good girl. You told me to protect the family name. I looked at Mason. You told me it was just paper. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of the lilies and the ruin I was about to unleash. You were right, I said, my voice hardening into steel. It is just paper, and I brought a lot of it. I looked around the table, meeting every pair of eyes with a cold, forensic detachment. Tonight, we are done with the stories, I said. Tonight, we are done with the gaslighting. Tonight, we are going to speak in numbers and signatures, not tears. I unclasped the envelope. Shall we begin with the mortgage fraud or the wire transfers? I slid the contents of the envelope across the polished wood of the table. The papers fanned out in a perfect arc, a cascade of black ink and white paper that looked brighter than the fine china. It was not a messy pile. It was a timeline. I had arranged them with the precision of a dealer laying down a winning hand of poker, starting with the oldest thefts and ending with the most recent betrayals. I picked up the first document. It was a bank statement from 2 years ago. This is where it started. I said, my voice steady and projecting to the corners of the silent room. I held up the paper. This is a transfer of $12,000 to a debt consolidation agency. The authorization code is marked as family emergency, but when I cross-referenced the date, I found that Mason had posted a photo of himself at a casino in Las Vegas that same weekend. I dropped the paper. It floated down to the table. I picked up another one. Here we have a contractor invoice for $45,000. I continued. It is listed as emergency structural repairs for the main estate, but the address on the invoice is not this house. It is the address of my parents' summer home. The money came from my sub-account. The signature authorizing it is a digital copy of my own. Time-stamped at 3 a.m. when I was asleep in my apartment. My mother made a small, choked sound, but I did not look at her. I was not looking at family members anymore. I was looking at defendants. I picked up the email, the one I had printed on heavy cardstock. And this, I said, holding it up like a verdict, is my favorite. This is an email chain between my father and my Aunt Loretta. It is dated last Tuesday. I began to read aloud. We need to change the narrative. Robert, if she threatens to go to Eleanor, we need to preempt her. We can tell Eleanor that Savannah has been acting erratically. We can say she is under immense stress at work and is having a breakdown. We have to neutralize her credibility. I lowered the paper and looked directly at my aunt. Neutralize my credibility. I repeated. You were not worried about my health. You were worried about your exposure. You were willing to have me committed to a facility, willing to drug me, willing to destroy my professional reputation, just so you could keep buying cars with money that was not yours. Mr. Calder cleared his throat. He stepped forward, adjusting his glasses. He did not look angry. He looked bored, which was infinitely more terrifying. He pointed a slender finger at the document my father had signed just days before. I would like to remind everyone at this table of the Affidavit of Financial Integrity. You all signed 72 hours ago. Mr. Calder said, in that document, you swore under penalty of perjury that you had never utilized estate assets for personal gain without express written consent. He looked at my father. Robert, the documents Savannah has just presented prove that you lied on that affidavit. Since the affidavit was a requirement for banking compliance, that lie constitutes bank fraud. It also constitutes perjury. If we were to hand this folder to the district attorney tomorrow, you would not be facing a lawsuit. You would be facing a minimum of 5 years in a federal penitentiary. Mason stood up so fast his chair fell backward with a crash. He slammed his hands onto the table. His face twisted into a mask of pure, ugly rage. You traitor, he screamed at me, spit flying from his mouth. You are a rat. You sat there and pretended to be one of us while you were building this. You are ruining this family. You are disgusting. I did not flinch. I did not blink. I reached into my memory and pulled out the words he had texted me. If you drag me down, I will drag you down, I said, quoting him perfectly. That is what you texted me, Mason. You said if I exposed you, you would destroy me. You said it was just paper. Well, look at the table. It is just paper, but it seems to be heavy enough to crush you. Mason opened his mouth to scream again, but Eleanor raised her hand. She did not slam it down. She just raised it, palm open. Stop, she said. Mason stopped. The room fell into a silence that felt like the bottom of the ocean. Eleanor looked at her son. She looked at her daughter. She looked at her grandson. Her eyes were dry. There was no sadness left in them, only a clarity that cut like a diamond. Do you have anything to say? She asked. Anything at all. One sentence that does not involve blaming Savannah for your own actions. One sentence where you take responsibility for stealing from your mother and your niece. My father opened his mouth. He looked at the evidence spread across the table. He looked at the recorder. He realized there was no spin that could work here. The data was absolute. He closed his mouth and looked down at his lap. My mother began to weep, but it was a silent, defeated weeping. Aunt Loretta turned her face away, unable to meet Eleanor's gaze. No one spoke. Mr. Calder opened his briefcase. The click of the latches sounded like gunshots in the quiet room. He pulled out a thick document bound in blue paper. This is the new last will and testament of Eleanor Sinclair, executed this afternoon. Mr. Calder announced. He placed it on the table. Under the terms of this new trust, the entirety of the Sinclair estate, including the holding company, the real estate portfolio, and all liquid assets, is hereby transferred to the Sinclair Accountability Foundation. He paused to let the words sink in. The foundation will be overseen by a sole executive trustee. That trustee is Savannah Brooks. The charter mandates an annual independent forensic audit of all accounts. My father's head snapped up. Savannah. You are giving it all to Savannah. She is the trustee, Eleanor corrected him coldly. She does not own the money. She manages it. She ensures it is used for philanthropic causes, not for luxury SUVs or bailouts for failed startups. Mr. Calder continued. As for the individuals currently seated at this table, excluding Mrs. Sinclair and Ms. Brooks, you are each bequeathed a one-time sum of $5,000. $5,000? Mason shouted. That is a joke. I have credit card bills higher than that, Mr. Calder ignored him. Along with this sum, there is a stipulation. If any of you attempt to contest this will, or if you attempt to harass the trustee, or if you attempt to disparage the foundation publicly, the full contents of this forensic audit, including the evidence of wire fraud and forgery, will be released to the public and turned over to the Department of Justice. He looked at them over the rim of his glasses. It is a simple choice. Take the $5,000 and walk away with your freedom, or fight for more and go to prison. Eleanor leaned forward. She looked at the people she had raised. You have proven something to me tonight, she said. You have proven that if you have access to power, you will use it to hurt the people you are supposed to protect. I cannot give a knife to someone who keeps asking me how deep they are allowed to cut. She stood up. I sat there, feeling a strange sensation. I expected to feel triumph. I expected to feel a rush of victory. But I just felt a vast, quiet emptiness. I looked at my parents and I realized that I wasn't angry at them anymore. I just felt sorry for them. They had traded a relationship with their daughter for a kitchen renovation. They had traded their mother's trust for a car. It seemed like such a bad deal. Eleanor turned to me. She walked around the corner of the table and stood next to my chair. She placed a hand on my shoulder. Savannah, she said softly. I looked up at her. I am sorry, she said. The room blurred for a second. I am not sorry for the money, she said. I am sorry that I let you be the responsible child for so long. I am sorry that I let you carry the weight of their dysfunction because it was easier than confronting them. I left you unprotected because I thought you were strong enough to handle it. That was unfair of me. No child should have to be strong enough to survive their own parents. I felt a lump form in my throat, hot and painful. That was the only apology I had ever wanted. I didn't want the money. I just wanted someone to acknowledge that it had been hard. I stood up and faced her. I don't know if I can forgive them. Grandma, I said honestly, and I don't know if I can forgive you yet for not seeing it sooner, but I am done being the victim. I am done being the one who understands. That is all I ask, Eleanor said. She turned back to the table. Dinner is over, she declared. Her voice was final. You may leave. You can take the leftovers if you wish, but you will not take anything else from this house. Not tonight. Not ever again. My father stood up. He looked old. He looked like a man who had just realized that the ATM machine was broken forever. He looked at me, and for a second, I thought he might apologize, but he just shook his head, a look of confusion in his eyes, as if he still couldn't understand how the equation had changed so drastically. Savannah, you are making a mistake, he mumbled. I am correcting one, I said. He turned and walked out. My mother followed him, sobbing into her handkerchief. Aunt Loretta gathered her purse and fled without a word. Mason lingered for a second, glaring at the envelope on the table as if he wanted to snatch it and run. But Mr. Calder stepped in front of it. Mason sneered, spun on his heel, and marched out. We heard the front door close. Then we heard the sound of engines starting and tires crunching on gravel. Then, silence. The dining room was empty. The plates were still half full. The wine glasses were still stained with red. But the air was clean. The heavy, suffocating pressure was gone. "Come with me," Eleanor said. We walked out of the dining room, through the library, and out onto the stone balcony that overlooked the bay. The storm had passed. The air was cold and crisp, smelling of salt water and wet earth. The moon had broken through the clouds, casting a silver path across the black water of the harbor. We stood there for a long time, leaning against the railing, watching the lights of the distant ships moving out to sea. "Do you regret it?" Eleanor asked, looking out at the horizon. "Do you regret blowing it all up?" I took a deep breath. I filled my lungs with the cold, clean air. "If I hadn't done it," I said, "I would have had to spend the next 30 years being the good child. I would have had to smile while they picked my pockets. I would have had to pretend that I didn't see the knife in their hands." I turned to her. "I couldn't survive that. Grandma, I would rather be an orphan than a fool." Eleanor nodded. She reached out and took my hand. Her grip was strong. "You are not an orphan. Savannah," she said, "you are the captain now." We turned our backs to the dark water and looked back into the house. The lights in the dining room were still on, illuminating the empty chairs and the scattered papers. It looked like a stage after the play had ended. I squeezed her hand. "Let's turn off the lights," I said. We walked back inside, leaving the darkness and the silence behind us, ready to build something new in the morning light. The truth had been spoken, and for the first time in my life, nobody could take it away from me. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Please comment down below where you are listening from so we can connect and share our thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe to the Maya Revenge Stories channel, like the video, and hit the hype button to help this story reach more people.